There definitely are a lot of these Windows-based gaming handhelds lately, but is there room for one more? Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the OneXFly gaming handheld. This is a prototype that was sent to me, and I'm going to get some help from my nephew William, and I'm going to be giving you our impressions of this latest Windows PC gaming handheld. Now this is currently part of an Indiegogo campaign, and I'll put a link to that down in the video description below. However, this is not the first handheld from this company that I have reviewed. Last year I checked out the OneXFly 2 handheld, and for the most part I liked parts of that, and other parts I was kind of like, it's just okay. Well, it's basically 8 months later, and this handheld here improves on quite a bit of the stuff that I didn't like about that one. So let's go ahead and run through the specs here. So this is running a AMD Ryzen 7 7840U processor, which has 8 cores and 16 threads, and it runs at 3.3 gigahertz, but it can turbo up to 5.1 gigahertz. And it's rocking integrated graphics, so it's got the AMD Radeon 780M processor. This prototype here has 16 gigabytes of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. Now, one of the things I actually liked about their previous handheld was just how big it was. I mean, it was a monster. Well, you can see with this one, they've taken a much different approach because overall, it's much smaller than the OneXFly 2. You can see those handhelds side by side here. As a matter of fact, actually, the overall size is even smaller than the Steam Deck. It's actually getting down to the size of the Switch, which, depending on what you like, this can be a good or bad thing. I think for a lot of people, their previous handheld was just too big, too heavy. That was a complaint I heard a lot. And so this is getting down to something I think people consider to be a little bit more portable. Now it is heavier than the Switch, coming in at 180 grams, but it's lighter than the Steam Deck, and it's even a little bit lighter than its closest competitor, which is the Asus ROG Ally. And so this has a 7-inch 1080p display that is running at 120 hertz. And I have to say, games on it look really good. The colors really pop on this thing. As far as the battery goes, it has a 48 watt-hour battery, and it comes with a 65 watt charger. Now, the interesting thing about these handhelds is that depending on how much power you give to the games will obviously determine how much battery life you're going to get out of it. And this is definitely one area that they are putting a little bit more work into the software to get a little bit closer to how people use and interact with the Steam Deck and kind of how you will manage power. I'm going to get to that in a little bit here. I'll show you what I mean. You'll also notice that they've done a bit to make this a little bit more jazzier, or I guess, I don't know, more exciting looking, where they have these personalized RGB lights here. So obviously they're around the thumbsticks, but down in the corners, you also have it where you can actually get it customized. You can put your gamer tag or handle there. Now this is a review unit and prototype, so I didn't get to customize mine. I didn't get to put MetalJesus there, but you can see kind of what they're going for. I mean, is this necessary? No, but I do think it's kind of cool. On the top, you have a USB-A port as well as a newer USB-C 4.0 port. It's through the USB-C port that you charge the device, or you can actually connect an external display to it. So for instance, here you see me capturing footage directly from the handheld, which is really nice. There's also a 3.5 millimeter audio jack, and then next to that is the volume up and down, as well as the power button. And then you have the triggers, which you might expect. So you have R1 and R2, L1, L2, but then you also have these programmable buttons here, these little macro buttons. And those are programmable in the software, so I think they can be really anything that you want. So if there's a finishing move that you always want to do with your favorite character in a fighting game, that's where you could program that. On the bottom, you'll notice that there is a USB-C port there. Now that is a 4.0 port. And next to that is a micro SD card as well. So if you want to increase the storage, it's pretty easy to do. The speakers are on the bottom as well. And I have to say, they sound really good, and they're tuned by Harman Kardon. And I'm very familiar with that company actually, because they are the same company that has tuned the speakers in my car. Let's go ahead and talk about the front of the device, and there they've done an upgrade as well, specifically when it comes to the thumbsticks. I guess what you call those off-center, kind of like the Switch. Now these are designed to have zero drift on them, so they're basically 18-degree Hall thumbsticks. And in my testing over the last week or so, I haven't noticed any weird dead zones or thumbstick drifting in the games I've been playing, and that's definitely a complaint that some people had with the previous model. So they're trying to get rid of that with this one. I also want to point out that there are a bunch of small buttons around the screen, and in this new handheld, those are very useful. They're all programmed right out of the box. For instance, this one right here will bring up a virtual keyboard, which is very handy, as you might expect, because sometimes you just need to hit the space bar, or you have to type in some words, when you need to do a search for something, when you got to set something up, because this does come with a fully licensed version of Windows 11. So there is going to be definitely some setup when you get this thing, and that virtual keyboard is very nice. Now you can plug a physical keyboard into this. That's actually what I did when I was setting this up originally. But again, having a virtual keyboard just at a push of a button is really cool. And then this button right here is very Steam Deck-like, and it's very handy. So you push this and this will bring up the OneXPlayer control panel. It's in here we can mess with a lot of different settings where you can find that perfect balance between performance in the game and also battery life. So for instance, right there at the top, you can mess around with the wattage that is being used in real time. So you can go anywhere from 4 watts all the way up to 30 watts. If you're playing an older game or something that's less demanding, you can knock down the wattage and probably get twice, maybe more battery life out of this. You can mess around with the CPU performance as well as the fan. You can mess around with the vibration settings as well as change the display resolution on the fly. Right there is where you would change the RGB effect. So that's the colors on the thumbsticks as well as on the palm grips. In here, you can also install some optional monitoring tools that you can use within games. You can also adjust the screen brightness as well as the volume. There's also a button there that lets you reclaim system memory. So if you've been playing a lot of stuff and maybe it's starting to feel a little bit slow, you can try that and hopefully speed things up without having to reboot the system. One of the things that really makes the Steam Deck stand out, and one of my favorite handhelds, is that there's a great integration between the hardware and the operating system, SteamOS. And that has really been lacking with some of these Windows-based handhelds. It's really weird to have to use a full-blown version of Windows on this when it's not really designed to do that. And so that's been one of the attractive things about the Steam Deck. Well, they're definitely trying to address that here. And so if you hold down the button for a couple seconds, it'll bring up their version of their library manager, which is designed for the screen. And essentially it'll scan your Steam library, your GOG library, or you can manually add your own games to this and have them in a more pleasant environment, a much more handheld kind of way. And this feels kind of bare bones and it's not perfect. I mean, for instance, it's not picking up on any of my gameplay hours, In Steam, a lot of these games I have many, many hours played on them, but for whatever reason, this library tool is not picking up on that. It feels very bare bones. It's really just a launcher. But I will say, with this being included as well as the control panel, it's starting to get closer to what the Steam Deck offers. Again, I don't like it nearly as much. It feels a little bit clunky, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Now let's go ahead and take a look at performance, and I wanted to kind of show you just how far these have gone in a year. And so this is last year's handheld. This is the OneXPlayer 2. This is a much larger handheld, and this is running the 3D Mark Night Raid benchmarking tool that's designed to test these processors with integrated graphics. And as you see here, it got a score of 17,847. Now let's go ahead and test the new handheld, the OneXFly, and running the same benchmark as you see here, it got a much better score of 20,558. But obviously that's just an artificial benchmark, so let's go ahead and check out some games that have some benchmarking included in them. And we're starting with last year's model again, and we're running the benchmarking tool included in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this is running at 1080p resolution with high settings, and so we end up with an average of 29 frames per second. Not bad. And then here's the new handheld, and for this one I was actually able to capture the video out and run through all of the different scenarios. So there's 3 different scenarios that this game runs through. And you see here we end up with an average of 40 frames per second. So That's a pretty decent improvement. And again, this is 1080p with high settings, which looks really good when you output to a really large television, but you wouldn't have to do that necessarily on the handheld. Remember, the handheld just has a 7-inch display, so you could easily get a higher frame rate just by lowering the resolution, and I think it would look just fine. I also want to check out Cyberpunk 2077, so we're running the benchmarking tool there at 1080p with high settings, and you see we end up with an average frames per second at just under 30. This is another game where you could just easily bump down the resolution a little bit, also maybe bump it down to medium settings, and you'd get an even better frame rate. And of course, you guys know me, being a retro gamer, I'm always going to want to take some older games with me on my handheld, so I did check out some PlayStation 2 emulation. Here we have Soul Calibur 3, and I've gone in and tweaked some of the settings, and man, I think it looks just awesome. And then here is Jak 3. It's kind of funny, I've been itching to go back and replay the trilogy. You know, I love the first game so much. Second game, it didn't grab me, but I remember being really surprised by the third game, and so I've been kind of itching to go back and play, so I might do that actually on this handheld. And now let's go ahead and talk price, and these things are not cheap, especially when you compare them to something like the Switch or the Steam Deck, but I think people at this point are kind of used to these things being somewhat expensive. If you jump in early on the Indiegogo campaign, you can get one with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage for around $740. I guess the regular price is going to be up around $900. And as you might expect, you have a bunch of hardware configuration options, so you can go up to 64 gigabytes of RAM and 4 terabytes of storage, but it's going to be expensive. And so you can go big if you plan on using it a lot, but it's gonna cost you. And so at the end here, what do I think? Well, you know, Will and I definitely messed around with this. I've been using this for a little over a week now. It's a tough one. I really do like the performance of it. I like the screen. I still think the Steam Deck is more comfortable for me because I'm a big guy, got the big hands. I also really like how the Steam Deck has the thumbsticks that are on top. That's a personal preference. I know a lot of people are perfectly happy with that, the design where they're kind of off center like the Switch. Me personally, I can live with it, but I don't love it. The other thing is that I'm just not sold on using Windows 11 on handhelds like this because again, you end up having to use your finger to tap around on the menus and stuff. It's not great. I definitely prefer Steam OS. And while definitely this is more powerful than something like the Steam Deck and the hardware is nice, I don't know if I would actually say it's that much nicer where I would recommend somebody get this over the Steam Deck, you know? I guess unless you just really need to have the latest and greatest in mobile power, mobile technology, you know? Again, I don't have a complaint about it. It's just that it's hard to argue that the Steam Deck is such a good deal. But I do like how some of these companies are definitely putting more time and effort into making the software experience a little bit more like the Switch or the Steam Deck. I think that's a very good move. So guys, I would love to know what you think. Is this a big enough power boost over last year and some of the other handhelds on the market? Or do you think the Switch and the Steam Deck is good enough? Please let me know down in the comments. And as always, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing and take care.